sitting in this evening. Now joining me is Brandon Arnold. Brandon, you guys know him. He is the executive vice president at the National Taxpayers Union. Listen, Brandon, let me just read from this Breitbart summary from this Breitbart article that appeared today. I want to get your take on this. Speaker Mike Johnson and congressional leaders have struck a spending framework deal that may avert a government shutdown. However, it may frustrate conservatives and who want more drastic cuts. The bipartisan framework would set defense funding at $866 billion and non-defense spending at $704 billion for the current fiscal year, which is in line with the spending levels set with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The debt limit deal struck by President Joe Biden and former Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Okay, so I'd like to get your take on this. Brandon. Listen, I know that the Republican Party, we have a slim majority, even slimmer majority now that Kevin McCarthy has left. And also, oh, good Lord, George Santos from New York is no longer a part of the congressional team, if you will. But it doesn't appear to me, and I want to get your take, that Republicans are that serious about cutting spending. Is this a good political strategy, in your opinion, leading up to 2024?
Well, I would like to see them be more aggressive. The problem with Republicans is they haven't been able to agree on anything. So if you can't agree within your own conference on the approach that you want to take, you have very little negotiating leverage when you go into the room with Chuck Schumer or Joe Biden. And that has been reflected in a lot of the deals that we've seen come out of this Congress. Now, yes, I would like to see further spending reductions more than what we got here. But we also have to realize the reality of the situation. Unfortunately, we have a Democratic Congress that has shifted very, very far to the left, that just wants to spend more and more, despite the fact that we saw this insane level of spending during the pandemic drive inflation through the roof. They didn't learn their lesson. I don't think they ever will. And we've seen a similar mentality from the Biden administration when it comes to taxes and spending. So we have to realize the game plan here. We have to realize the lay of the land here. I would like to see deeper cuts. I don't think the 1.6 trillion number that Speaker Johnson landed on is the worst thing in the world. I think we need to build on that. But I think this is a small victory we ought to pocket, and we ought to pay attention, very, very close attention, to the road ahead, because there's already talk of a side deal that could be $70 billion in more spending. We have foreign policy issues. We have a border crisis. There's all sorts of more mischief that could go into this deal. If it's just 1.6 trillion or so, I think we're okay. If it goes much beyond that, we definitely have some issues.
I mean, listen, Brandon, I got to tell you, what type of times are we living in when we can say if it's only $1.6 trillion? I mean, this is absolutely insane to me. The rate of inflation, the government spending. I think I read earlier, correct me if I'm wrong, that Biden so far, his administration has spent approximately over, I think it was $6.3 trillion since he's been inaugurated, and that was as much as we've spent. The entire U.S. government spent from our inception all the way back, I believe, until 2002. So our rate of spending is just absolutely insane to me, and it is scary. I do realize that, listen, Republicans, maybe I'm being a little too harsh. I don't mind a government shutdown. Frankly, I know a lot of Republicans don't have the stomach for that, particularly in election year. They don't have the stomach for it in an off-election year. But, I mean, at some point in time, what do you recommend Republicans do to curtail the spending? Is there an issue that they can leverage, in your opinion?
Well, a couple things on that. First of all, I think the problem is when we have government shutdowns, they never work out well for conservatives. We always end up cutting a deal after the shutdown has been going on for a little while. We have news articles that are just, slamming Republicans left and right and conservatives for the shutdown. It always ends up being a political user and usually an economic loser as well, because we always end up spending more to cover up whatever shortcomings we had during the course of the pandemic. And the other thing that I think is really important here as we look at this spending and fight is right now we're focused on the top line numbers, the spending figures. And of course, those are critically important. But when we don't pass a budget, when we don't pass detailed spending bills, all of the authority on how dollars are going to be spent effectively goes over to the administration. And we've seen that time and time again, whether it's the IRS creating a free tax filing service, despite not having the statutory authority to do so, the FTC trying to beat up on everybody from supermarkets to tech companies, because they just don't like fundamentally capitalism. And the list goes on and on, the Department of Labor and so forth. These agencies are run amok, and the only way we can really rein those in is by passing spending bills that say what they can and, more importantly, cannot do. So Congress needs to pay attention to the spending levels, but there are a lot more fights that are taking place right now, or ought to be taking place right now, that we can't even get to if we don't start moving these bills and we don't start rolling up our sleeves and getting to work.
Okay, let's talk about, and again, I'm speaking with Brandon Arnold. He is the Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union. We only have a couple of minutes left here, Brandon, but listen, what impact do you suspect that illegal immigration is going to have on our debt load going forward?
Well, I mean, it certainly ends up costing more. You get additional tax receipts to some extent, but a lot of times the additional burden that they place on social welfare programs, social safety net programs, can outweigh this tax revenue that comes in. I think that's typically the case when you're talking particularly about lower skilled workers coming into the country. So, yeah, it's a big factor, and it's something that Congress, I think, is really attuned to right now, to say the least. At least folks on the right are really pushing. So we would like to see something done there to stem this tide here. It's getting completely out of control, and I think everybody, particularly those in border states, realize we have a crisis on our hands. But again, I think Congress ought to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time here. I think they ought to be able to focus on the border while they focus on top-line spending numbers, and while they focus on a administration that's run amok here. There are adults in the room that ought to be working on all of these issues simultaneously, as well as other priorities. So my one concern is that we let big, important issues distract us from other big and also important issues.
Fair point. We just have 30 seconds left. What does the House need to do to rein in some of the spending that comes directly from the president himself? Like he was able to give Ukraine $200-something million when Congress holds the power of the purse. 20 seconds. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that absolutely needs to be addressed in the appropriations process. We've allowed way too much authority in Republican and Democratic administrations alike to move out of the legislative branch and into the administration. That needs to be reined in through the REINS Act, through a fiscal commission, and through a regular appropriation.
Thank you. We're just out of time. Appreciate it.